Good evening, guys. Hopefully you can all hear me okay and that you're all well and enjoying this hot weather. It's a little bit hot for me, but hopefully you have managed to be able to enjoy some of the sunshine today. So this evening we are going to be focusing on costing, like I mentioned last week. So to anyone who's been joining us for the last few weeks, welcome back. Anyone who's new, lovely to see you. This evening we are going to start off with what is called a Menti quiz. I'll talk you through in a minute how you log on to that. And then, as always, we're going to do a spreadsheet. So the spreadsheet was sent out to you earlier today, but if you have registered since then, don't worry, I will send it out to you in the chat box just before we get started. So you will be able to go through it. At the end of the session, I will send out an email with all of the past recordings and a link to all of the past pre-work. So you don't need to chase me for it. As soon as the recording is available, I will send it out to you and you'll have access to all of that. If you do ever lose the email, if you email me on my out of office, there is also a link to all of those links. So you can find it all just in case I'm not able to get to my email straight away. If you are joining us on YouTube, great to see you again. If you do want to log in live, if you go over to the website, you'll be able to register and then you'll be sent out all of the files and recordings from all of the past sessions. Great, okay then. So as always, we start off with a Menti quiz. So if you haven't used Menti before, if you go to the website, normally people do this on their phone or another computer or an iPad. But if you log into the website www.menti.com and use the code at the top of the screen, 325956. If you haven't got a device to log in, don't worry. You can still play along on the screen. All I would do is just say that if you are going to answer in the chat box, which is great, just wait to the last couple of seconds to give everyone a chance to be able to obviously answer their own questions. So how does it work then? So the way that it works with Menti is we have 5 questions. We have 5 questions every week that we do. And you get points for correct answers and you get additional points for how quick that you are. It's just a little bit of fun. If you go through it and you get all of them wrong, don't worry. The whole idea of this is that it's revision sessions. And if you get to the end and you've learned one thing, then that's a success for me. Good to see Nadia loves the Menti quiz. Perfect. I enjoy it as well. Just gives me an idea as well as to what you guys know. Before we get into the questions, I do try and link them to the spreadsheet that we do. It just gives me an idea of sort of like where you're all up to. Okay, we've got 69 people in there, so I'll just give it another few seconds just for it to update. Good to see lots of people are saying they enjoy them. That's good feedback for me. Just while people are logging in then, I will just let you know there is someone to take over these sessions now. So I will be doing this week and next week. And then going forward, they will remain at 7 o'clock on Wednesday, so exactly the same time, but it'll be my colleague Ben that will be taking over. So good news is they are going to be carrying on, which is fantastic. And obviously he will be able to take over and pick up from where I've left off. But the time is staying the same and Wednesday is staying the same. The link's staying the same, everything's staying the same. I don't know how many Ben will do. The end date is December, so they're going to go along to the end of the year. So I would recommend that you guys do try and sit your exam before that time. There will be a point where they start to repeat because hopefully we are hoping that you guys are going to be sitting your exams in the next couple. So Ben will be doing them for the foreseeable future until something comes up and Ben needs to move over and then we'll see what happens. I'll miss you too, Sarah. I've really, really enjoyed doing these sessions and they're really interactive, which is really great. But unfortunately, I'm going to be a little bit busy, so I'm not going to be able to come on the line. Okay, guys, let's get started then. So we've got 72 people, 5 questions. Let's have a look at how we're going to get on. Perfect. Question number 1 then. So these are all around your costing. So how do you calculate contribution? So 5 answers, always get slightly longer for the first question. Sales less all variable, fixed and variable cost. Sales less your fixed cost. Sales less your variable cost. Sales less your production costs. Or sales less all administration costs. While you're thinking about that, a question has just popped into the chat box. Can I send the links within Ben's session? It's exactly the same link. Ben's going to take over these sessions. So the link will stay exactly the same. So as you're registered, the emails will just start coming from him and it'll be him when you log in. So the link's exactly the same. Okay, so 3, 2, 1. Let's see how we get on. See if we can remember. Perfect. Good. I don't like it when it comes up on our one that we are looking for. Oh dear, Joanne, it's always that exam pressure, isn't it, so that you press the wrong one too quickly. But as long as you know it, that's absolutely great. That's the most important thing. So the way that we calculate contribution is that you take your sales less your variable costs. So you can calculate that for 1 unit, so the sales price less the variable cost to make that 1 unit. Or as we're going to do in our spreadsheet that you may have done as part of your pre-work, you can do all of your sales less all of your variable costs that will give you total contribution. Good. Well done to those 47 people with revising your costing. We also have a leaderboard. So the leaderboard will tell me who was the quickest and who gets the most correct answers. So let's see where we are after the first. Lenka, well done. You're at the top. Let's see if you can hold on to that spot when we go through our next 4 questions. So question number 2, again, focused around costing this week. Fixed cost over contribution per unit is the formula to calculate what? Fixed cost per unit, break-even point, margin of safety in units, margin of safety as a percentage, or fixed cost per unit of contribution. So which of those 5 is fixed cost over contribution per unit, the formula to calculate? If you're not sure, you've got 6 seconds, you might as well guess. See how you get on. Let's see how we did. Fabulous, really good there, guys. 61 people getting that right. That's absolutely brilliant. That's how you calculate then your break-even point. And I'm not going to ask you what break-even point is because it's going to come up in a question in a moment. But you're absolutely right. That's brilliant, guys. Really good costing knowledge there. You're absolutely right. That is how you calculate your break-even point. Let's see what that did to our leaderboard. Becky the fastest there and taken over to the top spot. Well done, absolutely spot on. Let's see how we get on with our 3 questions then. Good, okay. The challenge is on, Lenka. See if you can get back to that top spot. It's not really, it's just a bit of fun, but let's see how you can do. Okay, question number 3. What do we mean by the break-even point? So normally I go through what these things mean, but I didn't because I knew this question was coming up. The profit of a contract, how many units we expect to sell, the loss of a contract, the point where no profit or loss is made, or the actual sales units. Three, 2, 1. Oh, brilliant. Look at that. 79 people and Joanna in the text box getting that right. Spot on. You're absolutely right. Great costing knowledge, guys. Yeah, I don't think we've had an answer like that so far in our weeks. The point where no profit and no loss is made. You're absolutely right. So that means that at that point, I've sold the number of units. That means I don't make any profit or any loss. So if I sell 1 less unit, I'm starting to make a loss. If I sell 1 more unit, I'm starting to make a profit. So it's a really, really important thing for a business to know where their break-even point is in units and in revenue as well. So both of those are normally things that you might get asked to calculate in costing. Great. Let's see what that did to our leaderboard then. I think this is great knowledge. I think they're doing better than our ethics, I think, here. Normally we do this on ethics. Good. Let's see how it goes. The fastest, so she's going to stay at the top. So well done there. 2 to go then. So let's see how we get on with the last 2. Good. Another costing question. Budgeted volume less break-even point is the formula to calculate what? Margin of safety in units, sales units to achieve target profit, the payback period, the margin of safety as a percentage, or the internal rate of return. So you've got 14 seconds. If you're not sure, have a guess. You've got a 1 in 5 chance of getting that correct. But think about the formula. Think about what that potentially could be telling you and see if you can logically work out what that would be. Good. Well done, Joe, in the chat box. And well done to those 52 people that got that correct. You're absolutely right. It is the margin of safety in units. Now, again, I'm not going to ask what the margin of safety tells us because that's our next question that we're going to look at. So I'm going to have a look at the last question and then we'll have a little talk about what margin of safety is. Good. Well done, guys. Really great knowledge this evening. Let's have a look what it's done to the leaderboard. Becky's still the fastest, so she's going to stay at the top there. Brilliant. Well done. Last question then, guys. What does the margin of safety in units tell us? So why do we need to know it? So the profit we expect to make, the units we do when we do not make a profit or loss, the loss we expect to make, when we will pay back our investment, or how many units above the break-even point we expect to sell. So 1 out of 5 is correct. So you've got 10 seconds. So if you're not sure, I don't know what that is. If you're not sure, take a guess out of those 5. Good, brilliant, perfect. 53 people getting that correct. You're absolutely right there. So if we think about what the formula was for our margin of safety, it was the budgeted volume, so how many units we expected to sell, taking away the break-even point in units. So it's how many units that we expect to sell above that point. So really, it's how many units we expect to be in profit for. So if I expect to sell 2,000 units above my break-even point, then I know that my sales can drop by 2,000 before I start making a loss. So it's a really, really useful indication for businesses to have been able to calculate for us to obviously work out how many we are above that. Good, okay. Let's have a look at our final part of our leaderboard then. Who's going to finish at the top? Oh, look, final person, Ali, coming in there and just pipping everybody at the post. Well done, you're our winner for this week. But like I said right at the beginning, this is literally just a bit of fun with the Menti. All I'm interested in is that you guys take something away from it. So if you've learned something from it, that is the most important thing. We do normally do these Menti on ethics, but I did find that there was a lot of questions from people around costing, so I thought it was worth us obviously spending a little bit of time. And costing's very, very examinable in the synoptic exam, so it's really important that you do put in the time to actually make sure you do learn all of those formulas. Good, so well done to everybody there. And let's have a look now at our spreadsheet for this evening. For some unknown reason, there's now writing across my screen. So if you did log in, you did register this afternoon, you may not have received the question from me. So I've just popped it into the chat box. You can open it and you can work along with us as we go through it. But like I said earlier, right at the end of the session, I will be sending out the recording. I will be sending out a link to all of the files. So if you do just want to watch and follow through together, then you will be able to go back and actually do this in your own time and rewatch the recording once you've had a go. So don't worry about that if you're going to panic about that in any time. So the way that we always do this then is I've written a couple of requirements that we're going to go through. We're going to read the requirements and we're going to fill in the spreadsheet. And what I normally end up doing is just highlighting each one when I'm happy that I've fulfilled the requirement. So this week, we're a management accountant. We work for Magic Limited and we do the management accounts for this company. It's the 31st of March, X4, not hugely important for this question, but sometimes it is. And you've got some instructions there as to how you save the file. That obviously you will follow on your spreadsheet when you're doing your exam and follow what the AAT requirements are. Reasonably short task because obviously we only have an hour. It will be slightly longer in your exam. Remember what I said last week. Next week we're going to focus on the format of the exam. So we will talk about the kind of format that you may see in your exam. So we're going to cover any questions of those next week. Someone needs to mute their mic. Okay. Is that any better? I've just muted everybody, so hopefully that should be better. It may be my internet, to be honest. Is that any better? Perfect, good. Thanks. There was another question there. So when naming the spreadsheet, is date part of our date of birth? Don't worry about that. Just follow the instructions that the AAT give you. That's just an example of what they might ask you to do. So don't worry about that bit too much. The instructions will come from the AAT. They'll be really clear and you'll be able to follow them when you do get through on your exam. Okay, so let's have a look as we go through our instructions. Just let me know if you do get any issues with that feedback. It may have been my internet, my window's open. It might be better if I shut the window. Just let me know if that does happen again. Okay, so we are going to start off with our worksheet budget. So open the worksheet budget. Remember what we always say, make sure you, okay, bear with me just 1 second and I'm going to shut that window, 1 second. Is that any better? I've shut the window now. Lovely. Thanks for letting me know, guys. It's really, really hot in my kitchen, so I'm very heavily pregnant, so I had the window wide open. So now you might get me a little bit hot, but that's better than you guys getting feedback. Okay, so let's have a look then. So open the worksheet budget, fill the empty cells for quantities and costs, and it tells you that you've got cells B7 to B9 and C7 to C9. We're going to do that using lookup functions and reference them to the cost data worksheet. We're then going to use a formula to calculate the cost per unit for each of the lines D7 to D9. Now at the moment that seems like a lot of things to do, but if we click onto the budget worksheet, you'll see that what we're going to do is we're going to fill in this box here. And we're going to use lookup, so VLOOKUPs that we looked at a couple of weeks ago, and we're going to link them to our cost data tab, and you can see here quantities per unit and cost per kilogram per hour. So we're going to use VLOOKUPs to fill in these boxes, and then we're going to use a formula to fill in this cost per unit over here. Hopefully everyone's happy with that. So when we did VLOOKUPs, everyone was quite comfortable with it. So let's see if we can, obviously, please let me know if you have got any questions, if you are joining us for the first time. But I'm going to type them in. Remember, you can use your function box up here. That is available to you in the exam. So either one is absolutely fine. But I'm just going to type into these boxes our formula to fill this in. So Michaela's just asked, when they said lookup, is it the same as a VLOOKUP? You could use a HLOOKUP. It wouldn't work in this scenario, but it does mean that it wants you to have a lookup, use a lookup function, yes. So either a vertical lookup or a horizontal lookup. A horizontal lookup wouldn't work in this scenario. So yes, you do want to make sure you use a VLOOKUP for this. So let's have a look then. So we're going to do equals VLOOKUP. And as we open up our bracket, remember it gives us our indicators and our boxes here as to how we're going to fill them in. So we're going to find out what we're going to look up, what table we're going to look it up, what column we'd like to bring back. And remember, for this exam, we're always going to put 0. So if you have done anything else in that box, that's great. But I'm only going to teach the simple way just in case there's people that haven't seen it before. So the first one is to do my lookup value. Well, I want to look up this word here, direct materials. So I'm just going to click on it, and that's what I'd like it to look up. And as I press my comma, you can see that it does no longer highlight the lookup value. It now highlights the table. Now it told me that I'm going to look it up in cost data. So if I click on my cost data, I'm going to look up A3 through to C5. And if I don't let go of the cursor, you'll see in a little white box underneath 3R times 3C. That means that I've highlighted 3 rows and 3 columns. Now I want to bring back the number in column C. So that is going to be the 1, 2, 3 column, the third column that I'm going to bring back when I go to my next step. So as I let go of the cursor, I can press a comma again. I'm going to bring back the third column and then a comma again. And for this exam, you're always going to put a 0 in that last part of the formula. As I press enter, it's brought back a 4 into that box. Is there any questions on that? So Becky's just asked, would it matter if you chose the direct material cell from the cost 3 part rather than the A7? Yes, it would, because actually you're not looking at it correctly. So you're actually looking it up from the cost data where you want to find it from, rather than from your budget worksheet. So you want to make sure you're always looking it up from where it's asked you to look for. Rachel, like I said previously, you can do that. You can put false in, but I'm only going to teach one way. There's lots of different ways that you can do that. But because I've got a lot of people on here that haven't looked at VLOOKUPs before, that's the way I'm choosing to teach here. If you've done something different that works, you don't need to change it. That's absolutely fine. So I'm just going to always going to make sure that I only teach one way to not confuse everybody. Let's just have a look at these questions. Absolutely, I can do it one more time. Yes, perfect. So this is the way I'm going to teach it. There's a couple more questions there about why would you do it at the end. That's absolutely fine. So Fabian, I've just said that a couple of times. If you've done something different and it brings back the same answer, that is fine. There is lots of different ways to do this, but I'm only going to teach one way, because otherwise there'll just be too many ways and it'll confuse too many people. So this is the way that I've chosen to teach it. So if anyone that doesn't know how to do it, that's the way that they can follow. So equals VLOOKUP. Open up my brackets. The first thing that's highlighted is to look up the lookup value. I would always look it up from the spreadsheet that you are looking it up from. So because you're being asked to look it up from budget, I would click on my A7 here. As I press a comma, it then highlights the table array, which means what table would you like to look up the word direct material from? So if I click on my cost data, I'd like to look it up in this table. And I'm going to bring back the 1, 2, third column, so column C, which is the third column in my calculation. And as I press a comma, I pop in a 3 to say that I'd like it to bring back the third column. And as I press a comma again, it says, what else would you like to do? And I'm always going to put a 0 in there, because that's always going to be all that you will need for this exam. Now, if I wanted to drag that down, I couldn't do it. So some people have mentioned this already in the box. What I would need to do if I wanted to drag this down, because as I drag it down, it's going to move A3 to A4 and C5 to C6. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to drag it down. I want that box there, that table, to stay the same. So what I do is I use something called absolute. And to absolute, you put a $sign in front of the letter and a $sign in front of the number. So I want to $sign in front of my A3. So in front of my A and in front of my 3 and in front of my C and in front of my 5. Now there is a message in the chat box that you can use F4. Now that doesn't actually work on my keyboard. So again, I'm not going to teach shortcuts to other people, because if it is something that doesn't work for them, it is going to just confuse people. But if you do use F4, that is a shortcut and it will absolute it for you automatically. But you don't have to do that. You don't have to do it at all. You can just type those in. As I press enter, what it's done is it's locked in those cells and it gives me the option to then be able to drag those down. And I can just do a quick sense check. So for direct materials, I've got 4. For direct labour, I've got 15. And for variable overheads, I've got 20. And I can sense check these back to that data. And that means it's all absolutely spot on. Has anyone got any questions on that? Perfect. Okay, so for my cost per kilogram, I'm going to do the same, but instead of looking it up to the quantities, I'm now going to look it up to the cost. So Fran's just said that you shouldn't put the $ in and dragged it down, and it seems okay. And I'm going to show you now, I'm going to show you a different way of doing it, and I'm going to show you why that worked, Fran. I don't like to do two ways, but I will just, in this scenario, just show you something slightly different which would allow you to drag it down. So if I do equals VLOOKUP again, I'm going to look up direct materials again. So it's asked me what I'd like it to look up. So I'm going to select my direct materials. When I press my column, comma, it's going to say what table would you like it to look it up in. Now what we did last time is we highlighted that data. What we're going to do this time, instead of highlighting the data, we're going to highlight the columns. So we're going to highlight E through to G. Now the only difference is I haven't just highlighted the data that I want in my table, I've highlighted the entire column, but you can see there that instead of saying E3 to G5, it now says E to G in my formula bar. As I press a comma, I still put column 3 that I'd like it to bring back. That's exactly the same. And as I put another comma, I'm still going to put a 0 there. I'm not going to change my formula whatsoever. And as I close off my brackets, it's done exactly the same. But the difference is where in B7 we had A3 to C5, now we've got just the column numbers, which is E to G, which means that when I drag it down, it's going to still work because there isn't anything to move. So I haven't looked at this data, and then when I drag it down, it moves down one cell and it moves down one cell because I've highlighted the whole columns. So it may be that you choose to use that way rather than the other way, because it means that you're always going to be able to drag it down. The reason we have 3 is because we're asking it to bring back the third column in the table. So this is my table, 1, 2, 3 columns, and I want it to bring back the data in the third column. Does that make sense on your question? Perfect. Good. Okay. So it's just a different way. It just means that it just saves you having to do that absoluting. But the VLOOKUP is exactly the same. The VLOOKUP's exactly the same way. Good. Okay, let's have a look at our next part then. So the next thing it said was to identify the cost per unit. How's everyone calculated that? How did you calculate D7? Anyone do it? Yes, you can use a second way in the exam. That's absolutely fine. Yeah, perfect. Good. Well done, guys. Absolutely everybody's got that who's written into the chat box. Perfect. So to find out the cost per unit, I'm going to multiply the quantity by the cost. So equals my B7 times my C7, and that gives me 48. And I can just drag that down to my other 2 columns, and I've now got those in there. If you've done a slightly different formula in there and it's got the same answer, that's fine. You don't need to worry about that. That's absolutely fine in your calculations. Good. If there are any questions on that, pop them in the chat box then. But I'm just going to check that I've done all of this then. So I've filled in my quantity and my costs using VLOOKUPs. And then I've used the formula to calculate the cost per unit in D7 to D9. Perfect. So I'm just going to see, Caroline said, I didn't know if they needed to be divided by the number of units. No, so it just says, oh, okay, she just didn't understand what it was asking you to do. Perfect. So it just says the cost per unit. Well, each unit takes 4 kilograms of material and it costs £12 per kilogram. So that gives you £48 per unit. Good. So I've done everything in that first one. Good stuff there. So what I'm now going to do is I'm going to move on to my second part. So using formulae referencing, which means can you reference to somewhere else within the spreadsheet, reference the data in columns A to D and fill in H4 to H13. So we're going to fill in H4 all the way down to H13 by referencing the other data on this sheet. So what it doesn't want you to do is to calculate it on your calculator and then type in the number. It doesn't want you to multiply the revenue number by the number of sales in there. It wants you to reference to elsewhere on our spreadsheet. So this is where your costing knowledge really starts to come true. If you didn't know how to calculate these things, even if you could do all of the spreadsheet data, you were really going to struggle on this next part. So hopefully from our Menti quiz, everyone seems to have really good costing knowledge, which is fantastic. Hopefully everyone was quite comfortable with these, but if you didn't know how to calculate them, you were going to really, really struggle when you got onto this part of the question. So for our revenue then, how did you calculate your revenue? What two numbers did you multiply? Good, lots of correct answers coming in, perfect. Well done guys, absolutely correct. So for our revenue, we needed to multiply our budgeted sales units, so how many we expected to sell, by our budgeted selling price. So lots of you have given me the correct answers in different formats, which is absolutely brilliant. But I'm going to multiply my number of sales by the selling price, which means I would expect to have made £2 million of revenue. Good. What did you do for your materials then, guys? How did you calculate that? Perfect, absolutely. So again, you're taking your budgeted sales units, which is 4,000. So that was in B1. And you're going to now multiply it by the cost per unit of your direct materials. So that £48. Good. So B1 times our D7, which gives us 192,000. Now we've got to do the same for labour and we've got to do the same for variable overhead. So what I could do is I could absolute one of these figures and drag it down. So if I was going to do that, which one would I absolute, the B1 or the D7? Good, lots of correct answers coming in there in the chat box, that's great. You're absolutely right. So if I was to drag this down, if I just do it without doing it, anyone that doesn't understand absoluting, I can then show you. So if I click on here, you can see that it's done D7 times B1. If I then click on labour, well, it's moved it down to the 225, which is great, but it's also moved down that 4,000. And I don't want to do that. I want to lock that one in. So that's the reason why we absolute. So if I go back and I absolute this B1, it locks it in. So when I drag it down 2 more cells, it's not going to move. So to do that, remember, you can use the shortcut if you're familiar with it, but if you're not, we're going to put a $sign in front of the B and a $sign in front of the 1. So a $sign here and a $sign in front of the 1, which means that when I now drag it down, you'll see that instead of that 4,000 moving, it stayed put. So it's now done the 4,000 multiplied by the 225. You do not have to do that. You don't have to absolute it at all. It's just a way that it could make it slightly quicker for you in the exam. But it doesn't ask for that requirement, so you wouldn't lose any marks if you hadn't done it. Good, okay. If there's any questions, pop them in the chat box. But I'm just going to finish off then these last 2 boxes. So we've got our fixed production overheads and our fixed admin and selling overheads, and you can see that they're over here. So because I'm going to use referencing, great, people are writing it absolutely spot on in the chat box, that's brilliant. All I'm going to do is reference my fixed production overheads to this £75,000. And then I'm going to reference my fixed admin and selling overheads to my 125,000. So all I'm doing is I'm just finding where on my spreadsheet I've got my fixed overheads and I'm going to link them over. So for my fixed admin, I'm not going to type it in because it asked me to use referencing. So I'm going to reference it over to my 125,000. Is there any questions on that top section there? Super. Should be quite easy if you were happy with your costing. If you weren't happy with your costing, that was horrible. So, and it only gets worse. So you do need to, it does just prove the point of how important it is for the synoptic exam to make sure that you are comfortable with all of these different sections. Good, so we've now got to calculate. Yeah, if they don't ask you for absolute, like I just mentioned, you don't have to at all use it. It's just because I wanted to make sure there that I'd shown you how to. They don't ask for it, so you don't have to. So Sandra, you said from labour you didn't understand. What part? All I did was just drag it down. So the variable overheads were your 120 times your 4,000. And then for your fixed costs, I've just linked it over to your fixed. Does that make sense? Just let me know quickly before I move on. Super, perfect. Now, if you use absoluting, so I'm just answering that last question before we move on, it will never be right or wrong. I'm just trying to show you a quicker way of being able to do it. So because the question doesn't ask for it, you didn't have to use absolute. So if you did use it, you wouldn't lose, you wouldn't gain any marks. It's just a way for you guys just to get through it a bit quicker. But if the question did ask for it, then you would have to use it. So it's also good for us to practice it, to know how to use it if that does come up. Good, okay, so we've still got to calculate net profit, gross profit and contribution. Again, if you didn't know how to calculate these, this was quite difficult. This is obviously a very difficult requirement. So how do you calculate net profit? Good, now you're all absolutely correct. You've all given me a formula there, but I'm just going to write next to here, revenue less all costs, because that's what you need to know that net profit is. Net profit is the bottom number of your profit and loss account. So it's your revenue less all of your costs. So if you know that, this should be quite an easy requirement. If you don't, this could be quite difficult. So revenue less the sum. Now I'm going to say it probably a couple of times, but there's lots of different ways to pop this in here. If you've done it and using a different formula, it doesn't matter. This is the formula I'm going to use. If you've used a different one, that's absolutely fine. So take away the sum of all of my costs, close off my brackets. It gives me 228,000 for my net profit. What's different between net profit and gross profit? So gross profit is still revenue, but instead of taking away all costs, what am I going to take away instead? Production, perfect. Lenka, variables for the next one. So for revenue, I'm going to take away all production costs. So I'm not going to have these admin and selling overheads in there. It's going to be everything else. So revenue less production costs only gives you your gross profit. If you're not sure about these, go back to some of your previous modules, look at a profit and loss account, and you'll see that you do revenue less cost of sales is your gross profit. Take off all of the other costs, it will give you net profit right at the end. So equals your revenue less the sum of all of your costs, but leaving out the one that isn't production. So all of the others are production costs. The one at the bottom is non-production costs. So we want to leave that out. And that should give you a gross profit of £353,000. Is everyone happy there? Super. Good. So, good, Lenka, that's brilliant. That's what we want to hear. We want to hear someone picking that something up. That's the only bit. What bit do you want me to go back to, Cheryl? What bit did you not get? This bit? Happy there now? Good. In terms of that question, so the question's just come through. The net profit was written first, and that's why I'm confused. You can't ever assume that they're going to give it to you in the logical way. So again, yes, I did write this in a way that it was a bit more difficult, but that is because I want to really test your costing knowledge, and the AAT won't always make sure that it's given in that order either. So just make sure that you're really comfortable with what each of these things mean. Another question's just come through is there a good way of remembering the difference between net profit and gross profit? Right, I'm going to tell you. the way that I remembered it as a student. And it's really stupid. And do you want to know how I remember it? Net profit is a smaller word than gross. So net profit is always smaller than our gross profit, which means that you've deducted more from the net profit than you have from the gross. That's how I always remembered it as a student. Gross profit was always a bigger word, so it was a bigger number, so it had only taken off cost of sales. And to get to net profit, I take off the rest of those costs that bring you down to a smaller figure. It's absolutely ridiculous, but it's worked for me for about 15 years. So if it helps even one person remember it, that's really good. Is it okay to do it in a different order? Absolutely, of course it is. There's absolutely no requirement that you do it in this order. Okay, last question, and then we're going to go to the end, and we're going to keep any more questions until we've got through the next bit. So can I show you net profit again? Net profit is just your revenue less all of your costs. I've just written it next to it, so you can obviously just look at that there. Good. Last one then, so contribution. So we looked at contribution in our Menti. It was our question. So what we do with our contribution is we take our revenue less our variable costs only. So again, we're still looking at this revenue of 2 million, but instead of deducting all of the costs, we only deduct the variable ones. So we're going to leave out these two at the bottom because they are fixed. So again, I'm going to use the same formula. So equals my H4, which is my 2 million, and take off the sum of my variable only, which is my materials, labour and variable overheads. Close off my bracket. It should give me contribution of 428. Everyone happy there? So I've just popped those in, and you can obviously just make sure that you're really comfortable with those before the exam. Good. If there's any other questions, pop them in. But let me just check that we've done all of this then. So using the data in A through to D, complete the budgeted sales H4 to H13. I think we've done that. We've done it all the way down for the bottom. So let's have a look at our next requirement. So using formula referencing to data cells in H13, 4 to 13, so they're the ones that we've just calculate the gross margin and net margin in H15 to 16, and the per unit profit and contribution in H17 to H19. So what we've now got to do is we've got to calculate these boxes here. So Andrew's just asked, can you do it for individual sale units for contribution? We're actually going to do that now. We're actually going to calculate our contribution per unit on this next bit here. So that's what we're going to do next. If you had done that differently and then multiplied it somewhere else, I don't think they could take the marks away from you if your number came back to the right answer, because there's lots of different ways to doing things in the exam. As long as you're doing it correctly in terms of understanding the accounting, I don't think you'd lose those marks. Good, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do these and then we'll have a look at some questions. So I'm going to do these 5 boxes and then I'll open it up to any questions on this section. So for net profit margin, when we do these, remember these are, you're going to have to make sure that you practice your ratios that you've seen in your previous modules. For your net profit margin, you take your net profit and you divide it by revenue. So what we're doing here is we're taking the figures from above, so our net profit, divide it by revenue, so H11, which is my net profit, divide it by H4, which is my revenue, and that gives me 0.114. Gross profit is my gross profit over my revenue. They're always over revenue when you're doing these ones. So I'm going to take my gross profit now and I'm going to divide it by my revenue. Now, if you calculated your net gross or contribution incorrectly, or you'd calculated your revenue incorrectly, if you got these formulas correct, you wouldn't lose any marks. So you won't lose follow-on marks if you then do this portion correctly. So you've got there your gross profit over your revenue, which gives you 0.1765. Net profit per unit. So we're now going to take your net profit. Net profit, and we're going to divide it by our number of units. So now we're going to take these figures and divide it by the number of units that we actually budgeted to sell. So you take your net profit, divide it by your number of units, which gives you 57. For your gross profit, you're going to take your gross profit divided by units, which is going to be your gross profit, which is in H12, and you're going to divide it by the number of units of 4,000. Contribution is our last one. So contribution divided by the number of units. And then we're going to take our contribution there in H13 and divide it by budgeted sales in B1 of 4,000, which gives us 107. So like I just said, if you've got wrong numbers in any of those boxes above, you wouldn't lose any additional marks by actually doing these formulas correctly. You'd still be able to gain full marks on this section. Has anyone got any questions or want me to go over any of those again? Good. Super. MPR and GPR times 100. I assume this is wrong. I don't understand that question. Oh, okay, Fran, I understand now. So it doesn't show it as a percentage yet. And the reason I haven't done that is because next it's going to tell you how to do it. So we're going to come back and do that in a moment. So I've just left it like that. You could multiply it by 100, yeah, and do it as a percentage. But I'm going to come back in a minute and I'm going to use formatting to do that actually. So if you have done that, that's absolutely fine. So I didn't understand the question. So Fran's just saying there, because these are still 0.114, they actually don't show as percentages yet, but we're going to use our formatting in a minute to make sure that we show that. So you could multiply it by 100 or we could use our formatting, which we're going to do in a minute. Good, okay, if there aren't any other questions on that section then, I'm going to make this bit yellow, and we've got one last bit before we go through and do our calculation. So Lorna's just asked, how do I do the contribution per unit? All I've done there is the same as the others. I've taken the contribution in H13 and divided it by the number of units, which are in B1. So exactly the same as we did for the net profit and the gross profit. Good. Helen, last question before I move on to the next section. So Helen's just said, I've done B3 minus the sum of D7. Yep, that'll be fine. Yeah, that'll be absolutely fine. It's just a different way of getting back to the same answer, so you're fine there. Good. Okay, so our last part that we've got here, using formulae referencing to other cells, calculate the break-even point, the margin of safety in units, and the margin of safety as a percentage in H21 to H23. So last three boxes down here, again, if you know how to calculate these from your costing knowledge, these are very easy to calculate. If you don't know how to calculate these from your costing knowledge, these are very difficult. So again, we are going to calculate here the break-even point. Who can remember from our Menti quiz how we calculate our break-even point? It was one of our first questions that we had. Perfect. Fixed cost. It is contribution, but it's contribution per what? Unit. Perfect. So contribution per unit. So you don't want to divide it by this contribution figure here. You want to make sure that you are using the contribution per unit to get your break-even point. Absolutely spot on. So just make sure that you're careful with that. Great, there's some formulas coming in. You're absolutely right there, guys. So what the ladies have done, they've added up the two lots of fixed costs, which is brilliant, and then they've divided it by that contribution per unit. There's lots of different ways to do your formula. So if you've done it a different way and got back to the correct answer, that's absolutely fine. I'm just going to show you this way, but you don't need to panic if you have done it a different way. So adding up our H8, which is our fixed production overheads, and our H9, which is our fixed admin overheads. So you could have used this ones in column B as well. That would be absolutely fine. But I'm going to use these ones here, add those two up, and then I'm going to divide it by my contribution per unit, which is my H19, which is going to give me a break-even point of 1,869 units. Is everyone happy with that? So I've added up my fixed cost, which are my two fixed costs up here, my fixed production overheads and my fixed admin, and then I've divided by my contribution per unit. So remember, if you've done any of these wrong, but you've done that formula correctly, you will still receive the marks for that in the exam. Good. Okay. Who can remember how we calculate our margin of safety in units? Who can tell me in words? You're absolutely right on the formulas. What's the formula for it? Perfect. Well done to those ladies there. Good. So you've got your budgeted sales less our break-even point. So I'm just being, yes, as I said at the beginning, everything will be sent out with all of the formulas. So you'll have all of this at the end. So as soon as we finish, all of this will be sent out to you with all of these files. So your budgeted sales less your break-even point. So if you know that's your formula, the Excel is actually not that complicated. It just means that you've just got to make sure that you know that formula when you do get into your exam. So as a lot of people have written in the chat box already, which is great, my budgeted sales is up here in B1. So I expected to sell 4,000 units. And my break-even point I've just calculated, which is in the cell above, which is H21, which is 1,869 units. So remember, your margin of safety is how many units you expect to sell above that break-even point. So really how many units you'll be making profit for. And you'll see that we expect to sell 2,131 above our break-even point. So that's how many we can go down. So Rachel's just asked, should we round up the break-even point? What I do with my calculations, and I do this every single week, is I leave them in the format that they come out. And then there is always in the exam some indication as to how you should round. So all I do is every single time I do these, I leave them all, and I get the same questions every single week. I leave them all because there will be some guidance in the exam as to how they would like you to show your rounding. So I always leave it until I get to the point where I read how they'd like, because I might want 2 decimal places, I might want whole numbers, they might want me to do it as a currency, they might not. And actually, you're absolutely right, you can't make part of a unit, but in the exam, you may be asked to round in certain places. This isn't a costing exam, it is still the spreadsheets. So I always leave it as it is, and when I get to that point, I follow the instructions. So we're going to get there in a moment. So good question, ladies. Good, almost there then, last one. How do I then calculate my margin of safety as a percentage? Good, super, lots of correct answers coming through there. That's absolutely great, guys. So I'm going to take my margin of safety in units, which we've just calculated as 2,131, and I'm going to convert that into a percentage. And the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to divide it by my budgeted sales. And again, I'm going to leave it because in a minute I'm going to use Excel to make it a percentage. So my margin of safety in units is what I've just calculated, 2,131. And I'm going to divide it by my budgeted sales, which I had right at the beginning, which is my 4,000 units, which is in B1. So as I press enter, it's 0.5327. And in a minute, I'm going to read the instructions and it will tell me how I should format each of these. Now, what that's telling me is that my sales can drop by 53% before I start making a loss. Now, I think that's quite a healthy margin of safety, and I think you'd be quite happy if your sales could drop by 53% before you start making a loss. And that's why we tend to calculate it in the percentage as well as units, because 2,000 units could be a lot, or it could be a very small number, depending on how many units the business sells. Is there any questions on those before we look at the next little section? Good, just in case they are, I'm just going to read the next bit. If there are, I can obviously go back and address those questions. So, have I done all of this? Using formulae referencing, calculate the break-even point, the margin of safety, and the margin of safety here. I'm happy that I have actually fulfilled all of those requirements. So next, it's going to tell me how I should be formatting these. So there's going to be slightly different formats for each of the different units or currency or percentages. So you need to really carefully read in the question how it would like you to set these up. So format all cells with money values to show a currency symbol, 1,000 separator, and 2 decimal places. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to identify in this question all of the items that are money. So I'm going to start off with this 500. I'm going to press Control on my keypad. All of these are monetary values. So are these fixed costs over here. So are all of these in this top section. So are each of these net profit, gross profit, and contribution. And so are my net profit, gross profit, and contribution per unit. All of those are currency. So I've now highlighted them all in one go. I'm going to select my currency, and it tells me to do 1,000 separator and 2 decimal places. So as I press that button, it automatically does that for me. So I've now formatted them in exactly the way the task asks me to do. If it wanted me to remove the decimals, I could just bring them back or make them format. There is about 50 different ways as to how you can do that on your computer. As always, I'm only going to show one way. So if you've done it a different way and it works, that's absolutely fine. Perfect. Next one is we're going to format the percentages. Format the percentages to show a percentage sign and 1 decimal place. So the next part that we're going to do is we're going to work out which of these figures are percentages. So your net profit margin, your gross profit margin, and your margin of safety are all percentages. So I'm going to highlight those. I'm going to select my percentage, and it tells me it wants it to 1 decimal place, which means that as I tick this box, it then extends it to 1 further a decimal place. So Leila, I've already said there's lots of different ways to do this. I'm only showing one way. There's different ways to do it, and as long as it fulfills the requirement in the question, you'll get the marks for it. So if you've used another way, that's absolutely fine. Good. For the last one then, we are going to format all other values to show 1,000 separator and no decimal places. So this goes back to the question that we had earlier. The last 2 that we've got left are our break-even point and our margin of safety. So we're going to show them with 1,000 separator and no decimal places. So you can just click on that comma there. That's a comma, a huge comma. But click on the comma, but I need to remove my decimal places. So to do that, I just click on this decrease decimal that brings it to whole numbers. Now, there's lots of different ways they can ask you to do it. The most important thing is that you really, really carefully read the question, because it could ask you a multitude of ways and you may need to obviously do them all in different, slightly different. So just make sure that you really do read the question really carefully. Now, I know we're at 8 o'clock, so if anyone does need to drop off, I am going to go through these last 2 sections. you will receive the recording. So if you do need to go, that's absolutely fine. It's probably going to take us another maybe 5, maybe 10 minutes, and then I'll open up for questions at the end. I'm not in any rush to go. So if you do need to leave, thank you very much for logging in tonight, and I'll send you the recording at the end and you can follow the end. And if you don't need to, I'm going to go through these last couple of boxes. Okay, is there any questions on that sheet there? Good. Okay. Last few bits then. So we've got a graph to do today. We've got a graph, so I tried to mix it up with the different things that we've got to do. So copy the data in cells G3 to H9 and paste special values into a new worksheet. That's always really important, that paste special values bit. Delete the revenue line and insert a column chart to show the cost for each subcategory and rename this worksheet chart. So G3 to H9, G3 to H9, I'm going to press right click and press copy, or you can do the shortcut on your keyboard if you're happy with it. Insert a new worksheet and I'm going to paste special values. So if I go onto my paste and hover over, you'll see that it says values, and as I click it, it will now paste it in without any formulas, and that's what it's asked me to do in the question. So I've pasted that in special values, and the next thing it asks me to do is to delete the revenue line. So all I've got to do is just delete that second line, and now it only leaves my cost categories that are left. So I've copied the data. If you wanted them, you can just press paste. So you could just do that normal one there. So if you wanted them, just paste. So I've pasted them special values onto a new worksheet. I've deleted the revenue line, and I'm going to insert a column chart to show the cost for each category and then rename the worksheet. Now again, this is something that there's lots of different ways to do this. Every time I've shown you a chart, I've shown you the same way. And what I find is the easiest way to do is to just highlight the data that you want to show in your chart. So just the categories and just the values. And I'm going to insert my column chart. So in the ribbons, I've gone to insert, under chart, I've clicked on the column chart, and I'm just going to insert there a 2D column chart. And it tells me to rename this worksheet chart. So I'm just going to double click or right click and rename chart. And that is all I have to do for that first requirement. For the next requirement, it's then going to tell me that I need to make some changes to my chart. Is there any questions on that part that I've just had a look at there? Good. So Michaela's just asked, why did I not highlight the subcategory? You can. I just wanted to explain, you can do that. It will just slightly change the format. I like to only highlight what I want to put into my graph. You can do it the other way. You'll just have a few extra, it'll just look slightly different. So I always try and show you exactly the same way. And what I've always done is to say, just highlight what you want to put into the graph. Okay, let's have a look at our last bit then. So we've done these last points here. Last bit, always read all the requirements before you start. So rename the chart cost by category. Insert a linear trend line. Change the colour for the highest cost to red and the lowest cost to green. Insert some data labels outside the end of the categories and show the data on these labels as currency with a 1000 separator and no decimal places. So I now know what I need to do, and I'm going to go back to the first one and I'm going to do that one first. So rename the chart cost by category. So back on my chart tab, I'm just going to select my chart title and highlight it, and I'm just going to type over costs by category. Done that first requirement. My second requirement is to insert a linear trend line. So I go back to my tab, I select my graph, and if you've got a different version of Excel, this might look slightly different on your screen, but there will be somewhere, maybe up in the ribbon, where you'll be able to find this. So it will probably use the same wording, but it might just be in a slightly different place if you've got a different version of Excel. But in our version of Excel, when I've selected on this chart, I can go to the green plus and you'll see that it's got all of the chart elements that you can add on. I was asked to add on a trend line. So if I go to trend line at the bottom, if I just select this arrow here, you can see there that I've got a linear trend line. It could ask you to do any of these, and all you'd have to do is just select which one it asks you for. But I just want to select my linear trend line, and all it's basically done is put an average line across the calculation. Joe, the question it said rename the chart to cost by category. And then for the second part of the question, it says insert a linear trend line. So both of those were a requirement the question did ask you to do. Okay, for the third part of the requirement, it says change the colour for the highest cost to red and the lowest cost to green. Now, this always gets students stuck in the exam because they think that there's a clever way that the chart can do it itself. It actually can't. It's actually a manual thing that you have to change yourself. So what it's asking you to do is say, what is the highest cost? And instead of it being a blue line, you're going to change it to red. Now, the way to do that, we can clearly see labour's the highest cost, is if I select the labour column, you'll see all of the columns are highlighted. If I click it again, you'll see that all of the others are now not highlighted. It's just the labour column that is highlighted. And all you've got to do is just go to the format and on shape fill, just change it to red. It's a really, really common thing that AAT asks you to do. And everyone thinks there must be a complicated way of doing it. There isn't. The only way of doing it is to actually do it manually. So if I just show you that again, but for the lowest cost, so the lowest cost is fixed production overheads. We need to make that green. So if I click on it, you'll see that all 5 of the columns are selected. If I select it again, so fixed production overheads, all I've got to do is just change that to green. So lots of you are writing, I'm really glad that you said that because I did it manually and thought it was wrong. Everybody does that. And it is such a common thing that AAT asks you to do, which is why I wanted to pop it in, because it's so simple, but actually you spend ages trying to get it automatically to do it through Excel, and there isn't a way, well, not that I'm aware of, and I've been doing this for a long time, so I don't think that there is a way of being able to do it. Absolutely, and sometimes it is really difficult, sometimes it is just really simple, and it just takes someone just to say that it is simple. If there is a complicated way of doing it, brilliant, but you don't need to do it in the exam. You can just do that, that's absolutely fine. Good. So change the colour to the highest cost to red and the lowest cost to green. So that's going to make that yellow. I've got 2 more things to do. So insert data labels outside the end of the categories. So again, back into my chart, I'm going to select the chart. Again, this could look different on your version of Excel. You'll have to play around to where it is. Add on my chart elements. And we are going to go to data labels with an arrow, and I'm going to say outside the end of my chart. So it could be in lots of different places there. I'm just saying outside the end because that's what the question asked me to do. Jill's asked, how long should this task take in the exam? Well, I make them up. So in the exam, you've got 1 hour and 45 minutes for your spreadsheets. I'd probably say you'd get about 45 minutes for doing this task in the exam. But I'm not sure because I kind of just pop in everything that I think is useful. So outside the end, I've now got my data labels and we've got one thing left to do. So show the data on these data labels as currency with a 1000 separator and no decimal places. So back on my chart, there's lots of different ways to do this again, like there is with most things in Excel. The easiest way to do it is just to highlight all of the values and just to make them currency and no decimal places like we do normally. And then we can see here that it's just changed it on my chart. So it now shows them as round numbers, but now as currency. And I've now fulfilled all of my requirements. I can see here that people are writing questions that are general. I'm just going to make sure that we finish off the spreadsheet first, and then I promise I will answer all of those questions that are a bit more general. Are there any questions on what I've just done there about the graph? Yeah, absolutely no problem. So if I just show you what I did there, if I just undo it. So the last part of the question was to make it currency with 1,000 separator and no decimal places. You can do it within the graph, but the easier way of doing it is just to highlight those values, turn them into a currency and change them down to no decimal places, and that just automatically updates your graph there. Good. Any other questions on the spreadsheet before I open it up to general questions? Can I change the colour again? Absolutely. So let's just change this variable overhead here. So if I select on all of the data, what you'll see is it highlights each of these 5 columns. If I want to change variable overhead, if I click on it again, it highlights just that one cell. And then when I go into format, I can change it to any colour that I want. So if we make it a different kind of blue, hopefully that helps answers your question there, Karen. Just let me know if you want me to do it again. Fabian had a question. Can I repeat the data labels outside the end of the categories? Sure thing. So if I just highlight the table again, if you click on the green plus, it gives me all of my chart elements. If I go to data labels, on the little black box here, there's lots of different sections as to where I can put it. And in this question, it just asks for outside the end of the categories there. Good. Let me just see if there's any other questions on very nice comments here. Thank you very much, guys. That's really kind. Jennifer, the title of the quantity column confused me as the unit's different for each line entry. I'm not sure what you mean there, I'm afraid. Jennifer, you might want to ask that question again. Okay, guys, so there's lots and lots of thank yous coming through, so that's lovely. Thank you very much. Lots of good lucks as well with the baby. I have got one more week, so I will see you next week as well. If anyone wants to ask any general questions, they have gone right up the chat box now. So if you want to retype them, I'm happy to answer any of them. I'm not in any rush, but if you do need to rush off now, thank you very much again. You will receive the recording and all of the files and everything's finished over here. That's lovely. Thank you very much. If there are any general questions, I'm very, very happy to go through them. So Sarah, did I say we're going to go for a mock next week? Now what we're going to do is we're actually going to do, we're going to talk about the format of the exam a little bit. So what kind of questions you'll get in part 1, what kind of questions you'll get on part 2. So we're going to go through a little bit of that and then do another spreadsheet. So I think, I can't remember what the spreadsheet's on now, I have prepared it, but it will be slightly different. It will be exactly the same format. It's just the Menti is going to be about how the exam, what's formatted and what you can expect to come up and how long you've got for each section. Becky, not relevant to today's session, but can I show you how to do the print area? Of course I can. So if I was to go to File and on to Print, what you will see with this spreadsheet here is that it doesn't fit on one page. So if I wanted it to fit on one page, I'm probably going to have to play around with it. So I might want to change it to landscape. So then you can see a little bit more on there. And I might want to change it to fit sheet on one page. So you go to file, print, and you can just play around. This generally will be a format that will be okay to be able to fit it onto one page. So I've just changed it from portrait to landscape. And this one here is like your go-to button for most things. Fit sheet onto one page, which means that it now fits onto that one page there. You're not going to have to print in the exam, but you may have to then take a print screen of that page. And obviously, if I scroll down to the bottom, I can now see that it's fit onto one page. Good. Hopefully that answers your question. There's a question there. Please, can you show me the area of focus of the exam you showed last week? I'm not sure what you mean by that, but after this session, you will receive a link to all of the previous recordings and also the pre-work for last week. So you'll be able to work through last week's on your own if you have got any questions on that. See you all next week, guys, when you're asking here. Lenka's asked, I would like to know if the currency on the top of the column and asked to format a currency, do we have to put a pound sign in front of each number? It depends on what the question asks you. So it depends on what the question asks you, whether you need to do that. So you just need to read it. So in the question, it said all of the currency figures, show them in currency. It wouldn't show that. It wouldn't do that if that was the case. I understand why you're asking that, because in other exams, you don't have to, but just follow the requirements on the spreadsheets and make sure you follow it. Fran, you've asked, why is the break-even point not in currency? It's because it's in units. So the break-even point, that is 1,869 units. It's not currency, it's a number. So the break-even point could be calculated in revenue. You could then multiply that by the selling price. But what you're calculating here is you're saying how many units that you would need to sell. Ruth, I'm not really getting the idea of lookups. Could you explain why they're used? Well, if you was to think about this question here, in my cost data, I've only got 4 lots of columns. But if this was going all the way down to the bottom of the page, it maybe was like 30,000 lines, for example. What I'd be able to do is use a VLOOKUP here to say, well, actually, I want you just to look for direct material in that lots and lots and lots of data, and then it would bring back that figure on the scenario. These are revision sessions, so if you go back to your notes and also our previous sessions, we have done quite a lot of examples on VLOOKUPs, or just Google, it's why you get VLOOKUPs, and you'll get a lot more examples as to why you need to do them. But that's what you're doing really. You're looking it up in a really large set of data that will go right down to the bottom. Thanks, Ellen. So Fabian, you've asked me the difference between net profit margin and gross profit margin. Remember, this is a level 3 synoptic exam. You need to go back to your previous modules that do come up in that and have a look through those. What I would recommend you do is to find a profit and loss statement. What you will find, the difference between those two, is that in a profit and loss statement, you'll have your revenue less your cost of sales, which gives you gross profit margin, and then you'll take away lots and lots and lots of other expenses, so rent and rates and salary, for example, and that will bring you down to gross profit margin. So just have a look back at those other modules. You should have sat them, hopefully, if you're thinking about doing your synoptic, and that's the difference between the two. We also, a couple of weeks ago, did a task, because if you look back through the previous recordings, where we actually wrote an email that looked at the difference between net profit margin and gross profit margin. So if you watch back at one of those backs, then it would be fine there. You'll be able to find it. Ramon, could I do IRR in one of my sessions? I'm afraid not, because I've only got one left and it's already been prepared. So if you go back and have a look, did you have it on an assessment for spreadsheets? I think it's quite unlikely that you'd have it for spreadsheets or on your synoptic. It's more likely that it would come up in a costing exam, but you don't normally have to calculate it. But unfortunately, I hadn't got scope to go through IRR. You could always ask them to be able to do that. Becky, okay, yeah, perfect. So if the question only asks for one certain area of the print area, you would just highlight it and go to print area, wherever that may be. So on page layout, you go to set print area. So under page layout, print area, set print area, and then when you go to file print, it just prints that section there. So if it just asks you to do one section, that's how you do it. You set the print area, and hopefully that answers that question. Lost where I am. Sarah's asked again about rounding. I'm trying to put it in. Bear with me. There's a lot of topics that people are trying to put in. I'll try and put it into next week, but if not, I'll ask Ben to put it into one of these sessions. Thank you, Uma. That's great. The question here, not the recordings. I meant the topics for FAPR, costing, and advanced bookkeeping. I'm not sure that I understand that question. Can you ask that? Can you just explain that again? So the question of not the recordings, I mean the topics of FAPR, costing, and advanced bookkeeping for the synoptic exam. Can you just elaborate on that? I'm not sure that I understand. Thanks, Fran. That's lovely. Ben's amazing. I don't know if you've seen him on any of his recordings before, but you're absolutely loving. That's great. Okay, guys, I'm just going to stop the recording so it can start processing. But I will obviously stay on the line for a minute if anyone has got any more questions or anything that you want me to go through. I think there was a message a minute ago about going through break even. I will just do that again. I'm just going to stop the recording. So if you have got any more questions, stay on the line. But if not, I'll see you all next week. Thank you very much.